Welcome to Sahitya Safari. Today's story is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. The novel opens in the distant future at the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre. This institution plays an essential role in the artificial reproduction and social conditioning of the world's population. The director of the center, the DHC, conducts a group of new students as well as the reader on a tour of the facility and its operations. A biological version of the assembly line with test tube births as the product. They begin at the fertilizing room, move on to the bottling room, the social predestination room, and the decanting room, where embryos are conditioned and unbottled in a way that will suit the society in their adulthood. Along the way, the DHC explains the basic operation of the plant Bokanovsky's process, in which one fertilized egg produces from 8 to 96 buds that will grow into identical human beings. The conditioning that goes along with this process aims to make the people accept and even like their inescapable social destiny. That destiny occurs within a caste system or social hierarchy, ranging from the handsome and intelligent alpha pluses down to the working drone epsilons. We are also introduced to two workers at the center, Henry Foster, who will figure as a minor character in the story, and pneumatic Lenina Crown, a major character who will affect the destiny of the novel's protagonist. The DHC continues his tour of the center in the infant nursery. Here he lectures the new students on the importance of social conditioning as moral education. Nurses expose a group of babies to books and flowers and then add a violent explosion, alarm bells, shrieking sirens, and finally an electric shock. This experience, notes the DHC, will unalterably condition the reflexes of the babies so that they will develop an instinctive hatred of books and nature. World state citizens are conditioned to desire things that advance the interests of the state, not their own. The individual is not important, and happiness is less important than ensuring that people continue to consume goods, thus preserving industrialism and strengthening the state. Next, the director explains the origin of hypnopedia, also known as sleep teaching. The director leads the student into a dormitory of napping betas. From speakers under every pillow, the same voice whispers an elementary class consciousness lesson. The voice says it is good to be a beta. Alphas have to work too hard, and the lower three castes are stupid and wear ugly colors. The message repeats over and over, day after day, until the betas believe it instinctively. The government used the scientific discovery of hypnopedia to produce a technology that helps them condition their citizens to enjoy the life that has been predetermined for them. Next, the DHC's tour moves outside into the garden, where the students watch very young children engaged in erotic games. The DHC tells the students, to their shock, that such erotic play seemed abnormal in the time before Ford. Huxley is talking about Henry Ford here. While the world state doesn't have a conventional religion, it does have a symbolic and revered father figure, Henry T. Ford. Ford is the perfect god for world state society because in developing his Ford Motor Company, he invented mass production by means of the assembly line and the specialization of workers, each of whom has one single specific job. The world state takes Ford's ideas about mass production and the assembly line and applies them biologically to human beings. World state citizens, therefore, deify Ford as a vaguely remembered, distant historical figure who literally created the world as they know it. Suddenly, a man on the outskirts of the group speaks up, repeating that such old-fashioned policies were terrible. The director eagerly introduces his Fordship, Mustafa Mond, one of the state's 10 world controllers. The students are awed that Mustafa Mond is speaking to them. The director becomes nervous when Mond indicates that he's going to speak to them about history, but Mond Riley promises not to corrupt the students. He tells them about the old days when people had viviparous or birth giving mothers who nursed them, a thought that makes the students shudder with disgust, and families lived together in squalid, cramped homes. Our Ford had pointed the dangers of the family and the narrowness of monogamous romance. These things undermine all important stability, which the world state system creates by eliminating the need for complicated emotions. As a reader, we understand now that the world state arose from a conscious choice to give up all the best things about humanity in order to be rid of the worst things. The result is a dystopian world in which natural things like childbirth, families, and the emotions of romance are regarded obscene and unnatural. It's clear that the world state's most important value is stability, even at the cost of avoiding deep feelings and thus dehumanizing its population. In the changing room, Lenina Crown talks with her friend Fanny about their respective plans for the evening. Fanny has a locker full of intravenous drugs, a pregnancy substitute since she's been feeling out of sorts lately. Lenina has been going out with Henry Foster for about 4 months now. Fanny scolds her for not dating other men. It's bad form, she says. Lenina agrees that she ought to make the effort to be a little more promiscuous, so she decides to accept Bernard Max's offer to go on vacation together, although she agrees that Bernard, who is an alpha plus but short in stature than other alphas, is rumored to not like conventional sports, is a bit weird. Lenina gets into an elevator to go to the roof. She spots Bernard standing behind her former lover, Benito Hoover. She starts to discuss the plan of vacation with him, but Bernard, who gets uncomfortable, asks if they can talk about this in private. Lenina finds this request odd, as if she said something indecent. Then she runs off for a date with Henry Foster. Benito Hoover comes up to Bernard and remarks how pretty Lenina is. He offers the gloomy Bernard some soma, but Bernard walks off in a huff. Benito wonders if it's true that alcohol was accidentally put into Bernard's blood circuit. Bernard is smaller than most alphas and has always felt self-conscious inferior. As a result, he feels like an outsider. He even envies conventional men like Benito and Henry Foster, who move comfortably within the caste system. Lenina worries about Bernard's eccentric desire for privacy and his tendency to question basic social assumptions. She thinks him odd. In a flashback to their first date, Bernard hovers their helicopter over the English Channel so that they can observe the power of nature. Bernard wants an adult and emotional relationship with Lenina, not just the superficial factors of each other. A few days later, Bernard asks the director to sign the permit needed to visit the Savage Reservation in New Mexico. The director reminisces about his own vacation on the reservation nearly 20 years earlier. During his trip, a storm separated him from his female companion, who disappeared. The director realizes he has just let slip a terrible secret to Bernard. To hide his embarrassment, he chastises Bernard's recent non-infantile behavior and says that if it continues, Bernard will be reassigned to Iceland. With grim pleasure, Bernard thinks that now he is truly an outsider, standing up against society. Bernard and Lenina travel to the reservation in New Mexico, staying first in a luxurious Santa Fe hotel. When the reservation warden begins their tour, he explains that the reservation is surrounded by an electric fence so that no one can escape. Also, children are still born there, marriage still occurs, and old religion and extinct languages survive, and no conditioning takes place. Just before they enter, Bernard calls Helmholtz Watson, a close friend of Bernard and complete embodiment of an alpha. To his horror and astonishment, he learns that the director actually is planning to transfer him to Iceland. Now Bernard realizes he only enjoyed facing the director's threat because he didn't think it would be carried out. Lenina convinces him to take some soma. Though he'd resisted earlier, he finally relents and soon his worries melt away. The helicopter delivers them to a rest house in the valley of Malpais. Lenina soon discovers that she is out of soma, so she must experience the Indian village of Malpais as an unmedicated reality. In quick succession, she and Bernard witness old age in the figure of an ancient Indian. Indian mothers nursing their babies and a hedonistic ritual dance that fuses Christian and Indian religion are all baffling things for them. This wild dance ends with a coyote masked shaman whipping a young man until he collapses for a blood sacrifice to bring the rain and make the corn grow. After this bloody spectacle, Bernard and Lelina meet a straw haired, blue eyed young man, dressed incongruously, it seems, as an Indian. Strangely, too, the young man speaks like a character from Shakespeare and tells them that his mother, Linda, comes from the other place. When he also mentions that his father was named Tomakin, Bernard connects this young man with the DHC's visit to the reservation. The young savage introduces them to Linda, a very stout blonde woman. Lenina is repulsed by the woman's wrinkled and sagging appearance. The woman tells that she has spent much of her life on the reservation, where she gave birth to her son, John, the young savage. John recounts his life on the reservation to Bernard. Bernard senses how strange and exotic such a life is, as compared to his own experiences. Indeed, he feels as if he and John were living on different planets in different centuries. John's earliest memories involve his mother's relationships with Indian men, especially Pope, who also introduces Linda to the powerful hallucinogenic drug mescal, which she finds similar to soma. John also remembers how the Indian women beat Linda for sleeping with their men, and Linda initially can't understand what they mean when they say the men are theirs, because in New World everyone belongs to everyone else. As John grows, Linda teaches him to read. Pope finds an old volume of Shakespeare and the young boy studies it. In fact, John's reading in Shakespeare inspires him to try to kill Pope, but Pope laughs off the mere scratch. As John finishes his story, he and Bernard realize that they share the same feeling of being terribly alone. Suddenly inspired, Bernard asks John if he would like to return to London with him, while secretly strategizing to embarrass the director, whom he's realized must be John's father. He says that he will take Linda with them too, knowing she will inspire such disgust that the director will be even more embarrassed. At this news, John heartily quotes Shakespeare's The Tempest. "Oh, brave new world that has such people in it." Back at the rest house, while Lenina takes a summer holiday, Bernard makes the necessary arrangement to bring John and Linda back to London. He flies to Santa Fe where he telephones Mustafa Mond for permission and then he meets with the warden. During Bernard's trip, John breaks into the rest house thinking that Bernard and Lenina have left for London without him. Inside, John discovers Lenina's suitcase and looks through her clothes. Then he finds her sleeping in the adjacent bedroom and is once again moved to tears, this time by the sight of her innocence. Back at the Bloomsbury Center, the DHC waits with Henry Foster to humiliate Bernard. He plans to publicly confront Bernard in the fertilizing room with its many high caste workers. When Bernard arrives, the DHC announces in front of everyone his intention to transfer Bernard to a sub-center of the lowest order. The DHC explains that Bernard has grossly betrayed the trust imposed in him and that his unorthodox attitudes and behavior threaten society. He asks Bernard if he has anything to say for himself. To his surprise, Bernard says yes. Bernard brings Linda, whose appearance, sagging and discolored with age, horrifies and astonishes the crowd. She immediately recognizes the DHC as her Tomakin and tells him that he caused her to have a baby to be a mother. An appalling hush fills the room at the mere mention of this obscene word. When John enters and calls the Rietzi my father, laughter breaks out among the crowd. Completely humiliated, the Rietzi rushes from the room. The DHC has resigned because of the scandal, and Linda has slipped into a permanent Soma holiday. She is taking high doses that will eventually lead to her death. Because of his association with the savage, Bernard finds himself not just treated normally, but popular and sought after for the first time in his life. Bernard takes full advantage of the situation, sleeping with as many women as he can. When he brags about it to Helmholtz, he is saddened. Bernard thinks that his friend is jealous, but Helmholtz perceives that behind Bernard's back, people still don't really respect him. Lenina and Savage go on a date to watch a popular Feely. The Feelies are immersive movies that stimulate all the viewer's senses and also provide a sexual outlet in order to keep people satisfied and content. To her shock, instead of returning to her apartment with her, John bids Lenina a restrained goodnight and goes home. Then he reads Othello and Lenina takes Soma to console herself. At a party which Bernard throws so that people can meet the savage, John refuses to leave his room. When it's clear that the savage wouldn't appear, the guests grow angry at Bernard, whom they were only humoring for the sake of seeing the savage. The arch community songster, an important guest, warns Bernard to mend his ways. Lenina, who has shown up at the party, is confused by the rush of emotions when she hears that John isn't coming. She ends up leaving with the songster while a weeping Bernard takes Soma. Frustrated by John's shyness, Lenina determines to take the sexual date with the savage. When John addresses her with the formality of Maltese tradition and Shakespearean poetry, the confused Lenina simply undresses and approaches him directly. Horrified by Lenina's boldness, John pushes her away, threatening to kill her. Lenina retreats in fear. Then John receives a phone call with the news that his mother is dying. John goes to the Park Lane Hospital to be with his dying mother. Music, scents, telescreens, and an unending supply of Soma fill the ward, while Delta children romp among the beds, learning to view death as pleasant and useful rather than something to be feared. They annoy John, making it impossible for him to speak with his dying mother. When Linda wakes from a Soma dream and mistakes her son for Pope, John's misery turns to fury. He shakes his mother, who stops breathing, and, with a look of terror, dies. John, blaming himself, falls to his knees and begins to sob. To stop this display of sadness from harming the children's conditioning, the frazzled nurse gives all the children chocolate glares while warning John in a low voice to behave decently. In the hospital vestibule, John sees Deltas lining up for their Soma ration. Suddenly, thinking of Linda's death in slavery, he wants others to live in freedom. He pushes his way to the distribution table and shouts that the Delta shouldn't take Soma because it's poison. When they fail to respond, John seizes the Soma and throws it out of the window, causing a riot among the Deltas. Bernard and Helmholtz receive a phone call telling them what the savage is doing. When the Deltas begin to riot, Helmholtz is suddenly exultant, shouting, "Men at last," and joins the fray in John's defense. Bernard, however, is frozen in indecision, not sure if he should help his friends or save his own skin. Police soon arrives and begins pumping Soma vapor into the air and shooting water pistols. Meanwhile, the voice of reason and good feeling begins speaking from a synthetic music box. Tenderly, the recorded voice implores the crowd, "Why aren't you being all happy and good together?" Even the police get tears in their eyes. Within 2 minutes, the Deltas are hugging and Soma tablets are once more being distributed. Helmholtz, the savage, and Bernard are taken into custody by the police. All three are brought into Mustafa Mond's study. Mond comes in and shakes hands with them all. When John admits that he doesn't much like civilization, Mont unexpectedly quotes Shakespeare. He explains that as the one who makes the laws, he is allowed to break them. Hence, having read Shakespeare, he can quote him. Old things, he goes on, especially beautiful old things, are banned because they are not useful, and there is no good in attracting people to such things. Mont further explains that today nobody could understand a tragedy like Shakespeare's Othello because the world is stable. People get what they want, they never want what they can't get, and so they are happy. They don't fear death, they are ignorant of suffering, and they have no emotional entanglements. And of course, there is always Soma. When John objects to the Bukanovsky's twins and caste system, Mont tells of an experiment in which the world state filled the island of Cyprus only with alphas. Predictably, none of the alphas wanted to do the menial work, and before long, the island descended into civil war. The survivors asked the world controllers to take over again. Mont says that conditioning and the caste system make people happy with what they do. People don't even want leisure. Leisure only increases the chance to think, resulting in misery and increased soma consumption. At the mention of exile, Bernard starts groveling tearfully, begging not to be sent to Iceland. Mont orders that Bernard be carried out and tranquilized with soma. With Bernard out of the way, Mont points out that being exiled to an island is, for an individual, more of a reward than a punishment. After all, an exile gets to live among other interesting, unorthodox people. When Helmholtz asks why Mont doesn't live on an island in himself, Mont explains that he prefers the work of ensuring stability and happiness to the pursuit of truth. Science is interesting, but it's also dangerous. Mont then asks Helmholtz about his island preferences. Helmholtz requests one with a bad climate, more suitable for writing, and then goes on to check on Bernard. The savage, alone with Mont, asks if anything else besides art and science has to be sacrificed to happiness. Mont answers that religion does. It's not that Mont doesn't believe there's God. He just believes that civilization must choose between happiness and God. The savage insists that tears are necessary and that there is value in living dangerously. Mont concurs that artificial passion is good for health, but that it can be applied chemically without inconveniences. The savage replies that he wants the inconveniences. He wants God, poetry, freedom, goodness, sin. In short, Mont responds, the savage is asking for the right to be unhappy and to suffer. The savage agrees. Mont just shrugs and says he's welcome to it. Helmholtz and Bernard, on their way to their exiled islands, stop by the savage's apartment to say goodbye to him. Bernard apologizes for his behavior and says that Helmholtz has been very good to him. The three men feel fond of one another and happy. The savage explains that he asked Mont if he could accompany his friends to the island, but since Mont refused, he is leaving too, in search of a place where he can be alone. Later, the savage establishes a hermitage in an old lighthouse in a rural part of England. Here he commits himself to sleepless nights and painful physical exertions, longing to purify himself and to be good. He brings a few supplies, determined to grow a garden and become self-sufficient. When, while whittling a bow and arrow, he catches himself singing happily, which he realizes is an offense to the memory of his perceived unkindness to Linda, he whips himself. When a truck full of deltas drives by, they watch in wonder as the savage bleeds, vomits, and starts hitting himself again. Tipped off by the delta witnesses, reporters soon descend on the savage's hermitage. When a radio reporter tries to interview the savage about his ascetic practices, the savage curses and kicks him. But this doesn't deter a wave of additional journalists and helicopters. The savage manages to keep them at bay with his bow and arrow. One day, as the savage is digging in his garden, a stream of hundreds of helicopters roars overhead. When the savage asks what the crowd want with him, They start chanting, demanding to see the whipping stunt. Soon, one helicopter lands within a few feet of the savage, and a young woman gets out. She looks distressed and imploring, trying to speak to the savage. However, he rushes at her, calling her strumpet and whipping both her and himself. Fascinated, the crowd's conditioned to act in unity, begin an orgy-porgy dance. The next morning, the savage awakes and remembers everything. That evening, more helicopters arrive in search of the savage. When people look inside the lighthouse, they see John's feet through an archway. He has hung himself. And that's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos. This is me signing off. Till then, keep reading.